What's going on, Double A Nation? I'm back with another video, and today we've got a very interesting one. We're going to be repicking the 2011 NBA draft that included stars like Kyrie Irving, Kawhi Leonard, and Klay Thompson. Just before you guys complain over some of the picks, this is just my opinion on who's better, and obviously everyone has their own different opinions. And just to be clear, the players I pick are in this particular order based on their actual talents and performances on the court, and not on what the teams drafting them were looking for in 2011. So I don't take into account which team it is drafting the players, and although this makes it slightly unrealistic, hey, I'm only doing this for fun. In order to keep the video interesting and not too long, I'm only going to be doing the top 10 picks of the 2011 NBA draft. So the first pick of the 2011 NBA draft belonged to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they acquired the pick from the Los Angeles Clippers. The Cavs had selected Kyrie Irving first overall in the real draft, and that's exactly what I've selected to do as well. Kyrie Irving has proven to be one of the best ball handlers and scorers in the league and has multiple all-star selections. He's a one-time NBA champion, and in his 5 years in the NBA, he's averaged 20.8 points per game, 5.5 assists per game, and shot an impressive 45.2 field goal percentage. I believe he's the best player in this draft class and therefore deserves the number 1 overall pick. I expect Kyrie to win at least one more ring within the next 3 seasons, and his clutch 3 at the end of Game 7 of the finals shows that he is able to step up on the big occasion. The second pick of the 2011 NBA draft went to the Minnesota Timberwolves, and in the real draft they selected Derrick Williams. Derrick Williams spent his first 3 seasons of his NBA career with the team that drafted him and played about 23 minutes per game, averaging 9.3 points per game and 4 rebounds per game, which was not too bad for a player, but I think a number 2 overall should be the star player in the team, and that potential stardom should be shown in the rookie years. If you're the second overall, I think you should play more than 23 minutes per game. I'm not sure who the Timberwolves had as forwards in their roster back then, but if you look at the recent top picks, more specifically the number 2 picks to make it a fair comparison, these players become the franchise players, because if you have the second overall pick, then you're obviously struggling, so a high draft pick is most likely going to be the best you've got to work with. Take a look at previous number 2 overalls like D'Angelo Russell and Victor Oladipo. They're franchise players. Obviously Oladipo moving to the Thunder now. So in place of Derrick Williams, I selected Kawhi Leonard being drafted by the Minnesota Timberwolves instead. He was drafted as 15th overall by the San Antonio Spurs. Kawhi Leonard is such a defensive beast, and every year his numbers get better, especially with the incredible coaching staff he has to aid him in San Antonio. And although his career average is 14.3 points per game, last year he averaged 21.2 points per game, scoring 50% of his field goals and 40% of his threes. With the older generation starting to move on at San Antonio, especially with Tim Duncan retiring recently, Kawhi will soon be the face of the franchise. The third pick of the 2011 NBA draft went to the Utah Jazz from the then called New Jersey Nets, and they selected Enes Kanter. I believe Kanter is an underrated player, although his defense can be questioned at times. The first 4 years of his career was spent with the Utah Jazz, and he averaged 9.3 points per game and 5.9 rebounds per game, with a field goal percentage of 50% and a playing time of 20 minutes per game. And that increased following his move to OKC, where his playing time slightly increased, and in his 1.5 seasons in Oklahoma, Kanter is averaging 14.1 points per game and 8.8 rebounds per game, shooting with an impressive field goal percentage of 57% and 3-point percentage of 52%. And his 3-point percentage is not a fluke. He scored 13 3-point shots out of 25 attempted for OKC and 27 out of 59 in his whole career, giving him an outstanding 3-point percentage of 52.6% for a center. However, I don't think these stats are good enough for a number 3 overall, but he does make my top 10 picks, so you'll have to wait for that later. My number 3 pick for the 2011 NBA draft is Klay Thompson, who was actually selected as 11th overall by the Golden State Warriors. Klay Thompson's shooting is insane, especially from behind the arc, and when he's on fire and takes over the game, he can put up crazy numbers, like that game against the Kings when he scored 37 points in one quarter. 37 points in an entire game is very good. 37 in a quarter. Man, that's crazy. He's formed the best offensive backcourt in the NBA, along with Steph Curry, and his numbers just keep getting better every year. His career average is 18.3 points per game, but he's averaged 21.7 and 22.1 points per game in his last 2 seasons respectively. He has very high field goal and 3-point percentages and is 85% from the free throw line. It was a tough choice between Klay and Kawhi over the number 2 spot, and I only selected Kawhi over Klay due to his suffocating defense. Now on to the 4th pick of the 2011 NBA draft. This pick also went to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and to think that the Cavs could have drafted Kyrie Irving and Klay Thompson, or Kyrie Irving and Kawhi Leonard in the same draft is insane. However, the Cavs selected Tristan Thompson, and that selection in itself was not a bad one, as Thompson is an efficient scorer and rebounder and can score crazy alley-oops. So although the Cavs missed out on other stars, selecting Tristan Thompson as 4th overall is not a flop. However, instead of Tristan Thompson, I selected Isaiah Thomas, the 5'9" guard out of the University of Washington. This guy has been my favourite player in the NBA for the last 6 months or so, and his game has elevated so much. From being doubted due to his short height to being selected as 60th overall. Yes, 60th. He was the very last pick of the 2011 NBA draft. This guy has gone a long way and is arguably the most valuable player in the current Boston Celtics roster. He's just a huge motivation for all those guys being put off for being too small or short. Isaiah Thomas averaged just over 15 points per game in his first 4 years in the NBA, 3 with the Sacramento Kings and 1 with the Phoenix Suns. Him moving to Boston has been a revelation, and he can put up crazy numbers making the most of his size. And he's averaging 21.6 points per game, 6 assists per game, shooting a field goal percentage of 43% and free throw percentage of 86% in his 2 years in Boston. Now I know you could argue that since the Cavs drafted Kyrie Irving, they wouldn't need another point guard. But like I said earlier, this is just a list of the best players in the 2011 NBA draft. And I believe Isaiah Thomas is the 4th best player from the class of 2011. On to the next pick. The Toronto Raptors had the 5th pick of the 2011 NBA draft, and they chose to select Jonas Valanciunas. The 7-foot tall Lithuanian is beginning to establish himself as one of the best centers in the league, and his scoring and rebounding is key to the success of the Raptors. However, I don't believe that he is the 5th best player in the class of 2011, and in my opinion, that goes to Jimmy Butler, who actually went to the Chicago Bulls as the 30th pick. So that was a very good steal for Chicago. He's been a revelation for the Bulls, and now they're his team, with D-Rose going to the Knicks, although the Bulls GM did say he didn't feel that way. In his first season, Jimmy Butler averaged only 2.6 points per game, but he didn't really start any of the games and had very limited game time. But as his playing time increased over the seasons, his season averages have also increased, and he's averaged 20 and 20.9 points per game in his last 2 seasons respectively. When he's in good form, it's hard to stop him, and that was clear last season, especially when he dropped 40 in the second half of a game, breaking MJ's record for most points in a half, which was 38. Now we're on to the 6th pick, and I can never get over this one as it involves my team, the Washington Wizards, who had a high pick in a star-studded draft and should have taken this opportunity to add another star to play alongside John Wall. I've already made a video on this called What If Klay Thompson Got Drafted by the Wizards, where I also discuss why Klay Thompson was the guy we should have drafted. So Jan Vesely was who the Wizards drafted, and after averaging 4.7 points per game in his first season and 2.5 points per game in the following season, I think it's fair to say that he was one of the biggest draft flops in NBA history. Maybe a little bit below Kwame Brown, who was also drafted by, you guessed it, the Washington Wizards. Instead of Jan Vesely, my 6th pick would be Kemba Walker, who actually went to the then called Charlotte Bobcats, and he is one of the best ball handlers in the league in my opinion. His career averages 17.3 points per game, and last year he averaged 20.9 points per game, so he can put up some numbers as well. He's a player everyone would want on their team, and at times he's just electrifying with his explosiveness and his crossovers. It would have been awesome to see John Wall and Kemba Walker on the same team. Now the 7th pick of the 2011 NBA draft was traded by the Kings to Charlotte, and Bismack Biyombo was selected as 7th overall. He hasn't really been that good of a scorer, having averaged only 4.4 points per game during his 4 years at Charlotte and 5.5 points per game with Toronto. However, his rebounding ability is clear and he dominates the boards. Biyombo almost made the top 10 picks of this draft class, missing out on the 10th spot by a small margin, but he is definitely a lottery pick. However, his stats don't indicate that he was a 7th overall selection. Instead, I selected Reggie Jackson, who was actually selected as the 24th pick by the Oklahoma City Thunder. He had a slow start in Oklahoma City Thunder, mainly due to the competition there was with him sharing the point guard position with Russell Westbrook. While at Oklahoma City, Reggie Jackson averaged only 9 points per game and 3 assists per game, which is some weak stats in my opinion. However, his move to Detroit has seen his points per game and assists per game double, and he's averaging 18.5 points per game and 7 assists per game with Detroit. His move has made the Pistons a playoff team, making the playoffs for the first time since the Cavs swept them in the first round of the playoffs in 2009. Ironically, the Cavs also swept the Pistons in the first round of the playoffs again this year. Okay, 3 more picks to go, starting with the 8th pick that went to the Pistons. Brandon Knight was selected, and as you may know, he is widely regarded as the most unlucky player in the NBA. Just search it up. Constantly getting dunked over, flopping, getting his ankles broken, and that infamous open layup miss with a second left on the clock to win the game. He is, however, still a good player, but when compared with the rest of the class of 2011, he definitely does not make the top 10, and in my opinion, the 8th best player in this draft class is the 3rd overall pick from Turkey, who goes by the name of Enes Kanter. Kanter has taken a big step forward in terms of his development as a top center, although his defense obviously has its flaws. In his first 4 seasons, which he spent with the Utah Jazz, Enes averaged 9.3 points per game and 5.9 rebounds per game off 50% field goal shooting, and in his 2 years in Oklahoma City, he's averaging 14.1 points per game and 8.8 rebounds per game off 57% field goal shooting and 52% three-point shooting. The reason why Enes Kanter is not higher than 8th is because his defense is not that good and he can be a bit soft sometimes, and those aren't traits you want your center to have. The 9th pick of the 2011 NBA draft went to the Bobcats, and they selected Kemba Walker, who I selected earlier as the 6th pick for the Washington Wizards. So I won't talk about Kemba Walker, but instead we're going to talk about the guy I drafted, who was Kenneth Faried, aka the Manimal. The 22nd pick that went to the Denver Nuggets is an absolute beast who is a good overall player. He can score, he can rebound, he has a high field goal percentage and dominates in the paint. His career averages 12.3 points per game and 8.7 rebounds per game, and he is a player I really like. I think it's fair to say that without Kenneth Faried, the Nuggets would be a lost cause, although of late they do look like a very promising team, and if they continue their development as a team, they could make the playoffs in about 4 seasons, I'd say. Now, the final pick of the video, which is the number 10 pick, goes to the beast from Lithuania, Jonas Valanciunas. This guy is establishing himself as one of the league's best centers and is very efficient, scoring 65% of his field goals attempted, and is also 77.4% from the line, which is decent for a center. As efficient as he is though, he isn't scoring enough. Whether that's because he doesn't shoot enough or because the system he's in, I don't know. But to average 11.3 points per game off 65% field goal shooting is not enough in my opinion, and I'd like to see him at around 15 points per game at the least. His 8.2 rebounds per game is also okay, but he is able to average 10 rebounds per game in my opinion. Well, that's my top 10 picks of the 2011 NBA draft. What do you guys think? Do you think any of Tobias Harris, Tristan Thompson, Bismack Biyombo, Markieff Morris, or Marcus Morris should have made it into the top 10? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe if you're new. Peace.